Well, hello, good people of YouTube. I've decided to make another video. It's been a long time. I'm not very good at keeping a schedule on this. But I do need to be sort of inspired for content lately. And I guess you can thank a YouTube user named NoelPlum99 for inspiring me in that regard. He made a video yesterday that's titled Real and Simulated Universes, Is There a Difference? On a side note, if you haven't seen NoelPlum99's content, I recommend checking him out. He's got a lot of great stuff. He talks a lot about, various topics, sometimes just, current events and commentary on cultural issues and social issues. But then he does talk about atheism and theism and various things. Anyway, he makes this video, and the first thing that popped up in my head about it was when I was in school some years back trying to do philosophy, and I encountered, Descartes has a thought experiment called the evil genius. And in that, he uses that to lend toward his argument about the cogito ergo sum, or the I think therefore I am. And in the thought experiment, it's essentially, the gist of it is that you can trick a person's senses. An evil genius can come and change the world and trick you into thinking that you're really having this experience, but really you're a brain in a vat somewhere. But regardless of that, he can't trick you into thinking that you exist. Essentially, that's what Descartes was arguing. And then in, I think it was the late 40s, a guy came around named, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, I'm sure, Bousma? And he was another philosopher, and he responded to Descartes' evil genius. And it's been quite a few years since I've read it, so if I'm misrepresenting it, somebody out there might point me or tell me what I'm missing or how I'm mistaken. But what I recollect is that it was pointing out that either the trick of the evil genius is going to be functionally no different than the real world, in which case, what difference does it make? It doesn't matter. You wake up, the whole world was destroyed while you were sleeping, and then recreated it exactly the way it was. It's like we're woo-hoo-ha-ha, we're twirling our mustache, because I just created the world exactly the way it was before I destroyed it. I've tricked this person. It's like, yeah, that's stupid, obviously. It's like if I go into your bedroom while you're sleeping and I rearrange everything, but I rearrange it in such a way that it ends up back where it started. Obviously, that's dumb, right? So he points that out. He said either it's going to be like that, where it doesn't mean anything, or it's going to be obvious. And he gives an example of waking up. He has like a main character. I don't know if they had a name. It was a guy. A guy wakes up and all of a sudden everything's made out of paper or something. I think it was paper in the story. And he basically walks around and he's like, well, this is weird, and he's paper, and the walls are paper, and the grass outside is paper. And so it's clear that if your experience is one thing, and then you wake up and you have an experience that is completely vastly different, like everything being made out of paper, then you're going to know you're being tricked. At least that was the gist of what I got from his response. And I think there was more to it than that, but that's what stayed with me over the years. So I think that's kind of a good jump-off point when Noel Plum talks about this. He seems to indicate that he's not sure that there is a difference. But there's kind of two questions here. They're related, they're obviously related. But there's a question in the title of his video, which is there a difference between a real and simulated universe? And the question of, can we know, or how might we be able to know the difference between a simulated and a real universe? And obviously the first question sort of alludes to the second question, because when we ask it, we're asking how can we explain the difference, obviously, right? But I still think it's important to make that distinction, only because I can just easily say, oh yeah, there's a difference. And then I have no idea how to know, but there is. And obviously I'm just asserting something without backing it up, but still it's a good distinction to make. Anyway, so I kind of want to tackle the knowledge aspect of it, because I do have sort of a philosophy around that I'm working on. that kind of just ties into what I consider the basics of epistemology. The first things that it sort of goes back to Descartes again, which is that I think therefore I am notion. The first thing you really know, not first necessarily in a timeline sense, what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, not first in a sense of time, but first in the sense of your most immediate experience of existence is your own being. You know that you exist. As soon as you're aware and conscious, you are conscious of things, but everything's filtered through your own being, your own existence. I'm not going to get too bogged down in that, but basically that's where you start with anything. So if you want to ask when you can know if something is real, I think the answer to what a real universe is made up of, or what constitutes a real universe, is going to be something along the lines of pointing out that there would be no distinction between the individual's will and their actions. I know that sounds totally off on another tangent, but I'm trying to find the right words to explain this. It's something like, right now I live in the world, and it is functionally no different than a good simulation, right? I'm used to this world, I consider it to be real. It doesn't really matter what you call it. But if there were to be a distinction between a simulation and something that we might call real, or at least more real than this world, then it would be based on the knowledge that there is no difference between your being and your knowledge, or your will and your action. The duality. Let's just kind of broaden it and talk about it in a sense of dualities. This world is filled with dualities. There's a difference between the word water and the substance water. I probably said this before in one of my other videos. This is a common, for me at least, it's a common analogy I've encountered in some of the texts I've read. But we have a distinction in this world between a name and a substance of a thing. Will and action. Obviously, I might have a certain intent, and I might try to make that intent happen in the world, or make it manifest as action, but I'm imperfect, and my body does things, and I don't always want to do that one thing, and I meant to push the A button instead of the B button on the controller, and now the video game is doing something that I didn't want it to do, and I'm mad because my intent was perfect, but my finger sucks. I mean, obviously, it's a really basic example, but we all have that experience, right? I think that if there was a real universe, a real existence, to distinguish between that and a simulation, which itself is indistinguishable from what we live in now, that we call the real world. If there was such a level, a transcendent level of reality, it would have to entail there being no real difference between the name and the substance of a thing, or between my will and my intent and my actions. Those things it would be automatic. Knowledge would be immediate. You would just have it. It wouldn't be like, oh, I got to go study that and find out. You would just know things. That's what it would be. That's what would be the difference between a real universe and a simulated one. And later in the video, toward the end, Noah Plum asks, what would it look like for God to create a simulation versus create a real world or a real universe? And that's your answer. Well, part of the answer is what I said, but I would add to that and say there is no such thing as a created real universe. Or there's no such thing as a created simulation, depending on what we mean by simulation versus real. If by real we mean that which is indistinguishable from a simulation, then you can call it whatever you want. You can call it real, you can call it a simulation. The category of things that are created the same principles are going to apply. So there's not going to be a distinction between a created thing existentially being one thing and existentially being another. If it's created, call it a simulation. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't. If God created the world as a simulation. If there is such a thing as a real world in the transcendent sense, then it's not created. It just exists. It's like an extension of God's eternal being. That's what it would have to be. And depending on what religious text, if we're getting into that you're talking about or following, I suppose the closest notion that would embody that would be heaven, some sort. Some people say heaven's created. I don't know. Every text has different terms to talk about these things, so I'm not going to try to unpack all that. But yeah, essentially, it would be a world that is an extension of God's existence in the sense that it's eternal, and it has the properties that I described earlier about it's non-dualistic. There isn't a distinction between things, between substance and name, between will and intent, or will and action. These things are all as rational as we can try to think about that, to whatever extent. And I'm sure we'll find not loopholes, but we'll find hurdles that are, what does that mean in the case of such and such? There's going to be a lot of questions out of that. But I think that's a good starting point to consider if you're asking this question of real versus simulated. And I'm probably babbled on about this and retreaded a lot of stuff I've said in this video already. I don't script these videos. I just do it off my head. So